boys being taught they can menstruate, teaching adults how to be adults on local college campuses, and how inclusivity is destroying diversity. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. I want to wish a very Merry Christmas to you and yours at this holiday season. Every week, we at The Dr. Duke Show bring you those important stories impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses across the nations. Greetings to you all. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the podcast on iTunes, Google, or anywhere that you can download podcasts. Never miss an episode. Look, this is the story. If you want to know where America's going in the future, you have to understand how we're educating our kids now. We have a lot of stories to get to, so I'm bringing on Katie Petrick from the Healthy Republic, my co-partner in this criminal endeavor. Let's see what we got for this week.
We have our final Biology 2018 edition, where boys have periods. In England, the Brighton and Hove City Council tackled stigma around menstruation by telling teachers to teach 8-year-old children that all genders can have periods. The council reported trans boys and men and non-binary people may have periods, and menstruation must be inclusive of all genders. So what they're recommending is that schools should have bins used for menstruation products be provided in all toilets for the children, that transgender students get additional support from school nurses if needed, and they had a report that recommends that language and learning about periods is inclusive of all genders, cultures, faiths, and sexual orientations. For example, girls and women and others who have periods.
Yeah, this story is blowing up on the internet. A lot of people are talking about it, so we're not breaking this story for you. But I do think we have a couple of unique perspectives on it. Number one, you need to recognize, Mom and Dad America, that this is not just what's going on in some obscure suburb of London to 8-year-olds. Our universities in America are already basically starting with this premise. They are starting with the premise that boys and transgender boys who think they're girls, are effectively girls. That we are ignoring science, we are ignoring genetics, we are ignoring human anatomy, and we are arguing that everybody pretty much menstruates, or lactates for that matter. Consequently, what's happening now, the difference of what's happening in Europe is that they're starting to do it to little kids. That's coming to America next. We're not far away from that. And you have to understand, this is already the approach your university professors and college classrooms are taking, first of all. Second of all, if we're going to go this route, it is absolutely ludicrous and absurd. We could laugh about it until it hurts, because it's going to come whether we mock it or not. The other thing that we have to consider about this, if we're going to go this route, then maybe we ought to go the full route, because you can't be too absurd with this. If boys can menstruate, then we're going to have to make PMS medicine available to little boys in elementary schools. And I've said this before many times. 8-year-olds of male or female persuasion are too young to menstruate. And I love the word from the Greek and the menses, right, where we get menstruate. This is literally now a case of menstruation. 8-year-olds are too young, number one, to menstruate. And so it's completely, not only is it gender illogical to make these arguments in terms of sexuality, male and female, it's also radically inappropriate to make this argument to kids that young. You are telling little boys that they menstruate. At that age, you are not teaching them anything. You are just confusing them and, according to the schools, indoctrinating them. But again, it's not just PMS medicine. Maybe we ought to make sports bras mandatory for all middle school and high school boys' athletics, right? Because why don't we require jock straps in all the girls' locker rooms for girls' sports? What you're seeing here is not just some progressive attempt to undermine sexuality in favor of transgenderism or alternative sexualities. What you see here is a fundamental gerrymandering of reality itself. This is the progressive left now insisting that they get to determine more than biology, more than genetics, more than logic or reason or scientific evidence, that the progressive left is going to determine the nature of every aspect of what our kids are learning. This is a complete reprogramming, a complete unplugging with 10,000, or how many thousands of years you want to go back, 6,000, 10,000, 1.2 million years, however far you want to go back in the development of the human creature, the God-created human creature. We're going to unplug everything that humankind has learned over its sojourn on this planet, and we're going to replace it with radical progressive ideology on all subjects.
These same schools have already released these trans inclusion schools toolkits to help teachers treat gender identity sensitively. And in these kits, they are telling the teachers to teach our children to be respectful and inclusive of children who are questioning their gender. By not referring to children by preferred pronouns or names, you're harassing them. Schools are supposed to adopt non-gendered uniforms so that all the children feel included and reduce bullying. Now, here's the thing. Because they're talking about 8-year-olds, and as you've clearly pointed out, 8-year-olds have not gone through any sort of puberty yet. If you're going to put boys and girls into the same room to give them the talk, because we've all been through the talk, but the girls were in one room and the boys were in another, you're going to make it even more uncomfortable for any of the little girls in there who actually maybe are going through their periods a little bit earlier than the rest. When you have a group of boys in there giggling about it, it's going to make it that much more awkward and uncomfortable for everyone involved.
That's very well said, Katie, but you understand, I know you understand, we all understand this. The purpose of this is to uncomfortable kids, right? Kids that are comfortable in their skin, kids that are comfortable in their identities, kids that are comfortable in their sexuality, they're the problem, right? People who are comfortable being what they are do not subscribe to the victim mentality prerogatives, right? We have to make everybody uncomfortable. The only way you can mainstream transgenderism, or not even call it transgenderism, the only way you can mainstream gender confusion as a legitimate sexual identity choice is to make uncomfortable everything else. Again, if we just step back for a moment, we can talk about the hypocrisies of this all day. And on previous shows, we've done it, and I'm sure we're going to have to do it in future shows. But maybe with this whole naming thing, right, to not call a student by her preferred gender or his preferred name, why don't we just, if that's your argument, it is a form of harassment to somehow misidentify somebody, maybe we should just start giving people numbers. No. I mean, would that not actually accomplish what the left wants in perhaps more dramatic ways, more progressive ways than simply by shifting pronouns every now and then? Because again, according to the left, you can be a man one day and a woman the other. You could be a little boy one day and a little girl the next. And if you're the poor bastard teaching these kids, and the little girl decides on the next day that she's a boy but doesn't tell you, and you refer to her by her pronoun of yesterday, you could be guilty of harassing her. Get numbers. Numbers. This is what the progressive left is big at. Maybe we could take 6-digit numbers and tattoo them on the forearms of these children as a way of identifying them. Why do I think that's an idea that was tried before? Is there any history behind that?
No.
Take numbers, just tattoo these kids with numbers from the absolutely generic, and don't list the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in successive order, because 1 would be a greater number than 6, and somebody with the name 1 would be a higher priority than somebody with the name 6. Just random 6-digit numbers on their tattoo them on their arms, because what bad could ever happen with that worldview?
And just like you said, this is happening in the United States, and it's happening prominently on our college campuses because we're having a lot of colleges now that are placing menstrual products in men's restrooms in the name of inclusivity for our transgender friends. This was reported actually a few months ago. We talked about this story at Harvard where they wanted to provide free menstrual products in all their dorms, and a male student named Arnav Agarwal, he ran for the student senate solely on this issue because he says that if the college can provide free condoms, why can they not provide free tampons? So now we have a story coming out of Washington State University. It's in Pullman, Washington. And they want transgenders to feel more inclusive, so they're going to stock 3 men's restrooms with menstrual products as a test run. And the same university is allowing students to choose any name for their student ID cards other than their actual legal name. And what I love is that their ID cards are called the Cougar cards. And they're going to have all new buildings from now on have to have gender-neutral single-user restrooms. So this is just one university that you can see it's happening all over the country.
Yeah, when once one does it, they all do it. Look, there's a lot of ways to look at this as well. I mean, I would like to point out what we said before. Maybe we ought to start subjecting little girls to prostate exams. Because not every girl has not every boy has a prostate.
Turn your head and cough.
Every girl who says she's a boy is, right? Yeah, I'm not sure what they'd grab onto, but turn your head and cough examinations in the doctor's office. This is so absurd as to demonstrate my earlier point. This has nothing to do. This has nothing to do with making certain kids feel better about themselves. Most of the little kids don't even know what the hell this is. You're talking to 8-year-olds about this. This is beyond their ken. You start introducing this stuff to elementary school kids. They don't know what you're talking about. about. This has much bigger prerogatives here. And I'm going to do what I think is a Dr. Duke Show original. And Mike, when we talk about this my producer, when we talk about this next question on the air right now, I want you to put the little trademark for the Dr. Duke Show, because I have not heard anybody in the country talking about this. I think this is an absolutely new idea, and it's something you need to be warned about. The diversity mania is over. All of the radical diversity initiatives we've seen over the last 15 years, the stupid diversity initiatives, not that diversity in itself is stupid, but just the radical way the left has enforced it on college campuses, that's dying out. It's being replaced. The word diversity and its mantra has been replaced now with the word inclusive. And this is a very dangerous shift. Diversity means different people. At university campuses, diversity means everybody look different, but everybody think the same. That's diversity as we've seen it practiced on big university campuses. Inclusivity now is exactly the opposite. It's the opposite side of the same coin in a way. The inclusivists now are arguing that in order to include everybody, we have to censor, ban, or eliminate anything that everybody else can't do. So watch what's happening on my college campus, where inclusive excellence is the day. None of the previous diversity slogans. In other words, we as Americans are arguably the most diverse people on the planet. We have welcomed more diversity to our country over the last 150 years than all the rest of the world combined. So our classrooms, with the mania for diversity for the last 30 years, are radically diverse classes. We have radically diverse campuses in this country. So that's no longer an issue for the left. Now, it's inclusion, which means sororities and fraternities are on their way out, because sororities, by definition, admit girls and fraternities boys. We see colleges all across the country eliminating those things, right? Or forcing sororities to take boys and fraternities to take girls. We are seeing this across the bathrooms, right? You cannot have bathrooms for people who identify just as men or just as women, because that's not inclusive. So you have to have one bathroom, one communal shower, where everybody is compelled to participate and no one can be excluded from them. Under the name of inclusivity, this is the great radical socialist Marxist leap forward. Moving away from diversity now, diversity actually is bad. If what we used to think of as diversity now comes up against the term inclusion, you have to exclude real diversity. You're not allowed to believe one thing and I'm not allowed to believe another. You're not allowed to have your set of accommodations and I'm allowed to have mine. That's not necessarily allowable anymore, because anything that excludes for any reason, and by that, Christianity is exclusionary and must be banned. Science, biology, is exclusionary by definition, and the realities of biology must be overwritten in the name of inclusion. This is a radical shift now in our universities, going from dangerously progressive to staggeringly liberal progressive. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous here. All the things that have built the modern university now aren't enough. You will be forced to be included in everything. Everything has to be inclusive. It's a dangerous time on American campuses right now.
It most definitely is. And we have a story out of Oregon that parents and everyone need to listen up on this one. Oregon is considering mandatory annual mental health exams for all their middle and high school students in the public and charter schools. There's a bill called Legislative Concept 2890, stating that exams would involve an evidence-based accessible screening tool to assess students' mental health as evaluated by a qualified counselor or mental health professional. It this bill doesn't include specifics on who's going to be conducting said mental health tests, how the information will be used, or who would pay for these services. Now, they're claiming parents could opt their children out of this evaluation if they had a special form submitted to the child's school. Now, the Mental Health America, it's ranking Oregon as 45th out of 50 states in terms of youth mental illness, and that's the claim as to why they should be doing this. And Oregon, as a state overall, has the most mental illness. And there's an example they included in the story from Salem Kaiser Public Schools. They claim that about 1 in every 4 of the district's 42,000 school children have mental health issues. That's 10,500 kids having mental health issues.
Mandatory mental health evaluations from 6th graders to 12th graders, but there'll be an opt-out. Do you understand what I mean when I talk about the rise of inclusivity now as the latest progressive construct? You cannot have mandatory and opt-outs. The opt-outs are a way of dangling this in front of parents until it's made law. At that point, you won't be able to opt anybody out. And I love that. Counselors, quote unquote, qualified counselors will be administering these exams. That's a high school teacher with a 4-year, middle school teacher with a 4-year teaching degree, and that's it, who's had a 2-week seminar at the Ramada on how to mentally evaluate kids. You are not bringing in paid psychiatrists at every middle school and every high school to administer these tests. It's not happening. And because you couldn't give a simple test in a classroom setting that would determine these kids' mental health. What these mental health tests are going to be, once this is passed into law, is simply purely subjective evaluations based on progressive worldviews. Are you anti-homosexual in any way? Are you in any way ashamed of sex or uninterested? Are you a 6th grader, right? You're a 7, 8, 9-year-old, and you're not willing to become sexually active if the opportunity arises? There's something mentally health wrong with you. And this idea, too, you take one step back from it, classifying all these kids as mentally ill on the basis of what? According to these arguments, these surveys, these liberal progressive groups with fax machines in their basements, right? This number of kids are mentally ill. These huge numbers is growing every day. You understand this, right? When your public schools fail to educate a kid to pass their classes, when your public schools are unable to get a 6th grader to pass 6th grade, to fail that kid means they get less money from the state and the federal government. So in other words, there is no incentive for a school to hold back a struggling kid. Kids who may need to repeat a grade, kids who have not mastered 6th grade, and so therefore can't do 7th grade work. If the public schools fail those kids, they lose money. But if they pass those kids, they get money. And consequently, rather than fail poor performing students who need more work, we are labeling those kids now mentally ill. Because if you label a child mentally ill, then you get more money from the school, right? Mentally ill kids, you can deal with them in terms of grades any way you want to because they're mentally ill. And because you can point to having 30, 40, 50, 60, 80% of your student body mentally ill, the federal government and state governments are required to give you much, much more money for your schools for those kids. Is there any wonder, as our kids' performances gets worse and worse and worse, our kids' ability to read and do math at a college level is really, really weak now for high school kids. But now we have the solution. Those kids aren't failing, or the schools aren't failing, the teachers haven't failed, the pedagogy and the curriculum hasn't failed. What has failed is the fact that we didn't recognize that these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids are really sick. Give us more money, and then we don't have to educate them to college levels, and everybody wins, except, of course, your kids.
Over the summer, Oregon had a legislative committee that actually came out with a $3.5 billion wish list that basically focused heavily on mental health. And there was one proposal that was mandating every school would employ at least one counselor per every 250 students. Now, I guess Oregon is running a shortage of clinical psychologists and counselors to begin with. So not only do we not know how we're going to actually make this, $3.5 billion, we don't have people who are going to conduct these tests. So as you said, the people at the Ramada getting their 2-week seminar will be the ones doing the evaluation. So it's all.
But not only that, Katie. Even if you did that, you have one counselor, and a counselor isn't a psychotherapist. A counselor is somebody who can talk as a social worker with a special certificate and talking to little kids. Can you imagine the average social worker with a 250 caseload, student caseload? Even if you did it, even if you were able to get one counselor, not psychiatrist, one counselor into every school for 250 kids, can you imagine how impossible it would be for that counselor to decide anything? And I want you to understand this, Mom and Dad America. Right now, your kids are being evaluated on their mental health by people with no serious mental health background. This argument, all these statistics that are getting thrown at it, 90%, 95% of this concern over mental health of our kids is being diagnosed and in some cases treated by people with no serious mental health care background. These are kids, these are people you would, if you as a mom recognized a serious mental difficulty in your child's development, you would never take your kids to these people. You would never consider them qualified. And yet they're passing judgment on your kids now. And if Oregon gets their way, they're going to use the 6th grade to the 12th grade classrooms every year to give one of these psychosocial evaluations that has really nothing to do with your kid's mental state and everything to do with their attitudes. If your kid doesn't have the right attitude to transgenderism, if your kid doesn't have the right attitude to global warming, if your kid isn't sufficiently anti-gun enough, these are going to be triggers for mental health evaluative innovations, ways of reaching into your kid's life to try to change what they think and how they feel. It's going to be politically driven, not healthcare driven, because you know what? You know how you know I'm right? Because all the changes in American public schools in the last 10 years have been politically driven, not education driven. So why would you expect anything more from this?
And then we have my generation who came out of these schools and learned nothing. And I know how sad and pathetic we all are. I'm owning up to it. And that's why we have Adulting Day now for millennials, so we can teach them how to do adult things, such as paying their bills, or changing tires, or, hey, how do I talk to a cop when I'm not in trouble? They are going to be taught how to balance a checkbook, pay their taxes, basically do basic consumer math and business.
Can we teach them how to count change when you get a hamburger at the local Burger King? When the machine's
so
out and it doesn't
sad.
tell them, my God, these kids don't know how to, you give them $20.10. Right? Mm-hmm. They can't figure out the differential. It's staggering.
The best, if you want to do your own social science experiment, do that. Mess with a kid, or not a kid, an adult. Mess with an adult with change at a Burger King or wherever. You just watch their mind.
I guarantee you, yeah, she's exactly right. If you tell the typical pimply-faced 17-year-old, or in this case, 25-year-old millennial who's working at the local Burger King, you say to them, no. See, I gave you the change, so you owe me $10. Right?
Exactly.
You'll be $10 more.
You're trying to make it nicer for them.
But I guarantee you they'll give you the extra $10. I give you that 9 times out of 10, they'll hand you the money without bothering to know whether you're trying to scam them or not. And here's the thing that's so stinking sad about this. You're taking high school, in some cases college kids, and you're giving them one day to master adulthood, right? What were you teaching those kids from the time they were 5-year-olds? You've had those kids in your government school possession since they were 4 or 5 years old. They're now 18, 19, 20 years old. They don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to talk to a police officer. I remember in kindergarten learning how to talk to your local police officer.
Well, cops are bad now.
Well, now they're evil. Maybe the
evil.
Argument is that we'll teach you how not to talk to cops.
Maybe that's
Wasn't there a university? Wasn't it just last week we covered a story where a university was actually asking their students
Wellesley,
right? Not to call the cops if you see a burglar in the building or somebody being threatened. Don't call the cops because the cops will just make it worse.
Yeah, so this adulting school is co-founded by Rachel Flanger in Portland, Maine, and she said that she plans to launch online classes for millennials who want to learn about things like how to sew a button, understand modern art, or tell someone they love them, as well as how to have a relationship, how to talk to someone, and how not to fight.
Yeah, again, I ask this question. These kids have been in the public schools all this time. What have you been teaching them? What exactly have they been learning? And here's the thing. We know that these kids are not learning math at an 11th grade level for 11th graders or an 8th grade level for an 8th grade level. We know, I can testify that by the time they get to me at the university level, they don't read. They read like first semester high school kids. My college freshmen read about like 9th graders, first semester freshmen. It's 4 years behind where they ought to be. We're not teaching them math and science and history and reading. We're teaching them none of those things. So given that we've turned the schools over, particularly the elementary, middle, and high schools, we've turned them over to teaching them social justice values, right? How come they don't know how to do anything? You would think that if we were teaching kids nothing but sociological interaction with their world, how to transition their gender, all that kind of garbage, if that's what we're teaching them, you think they'd pick up the rudiments of surviving day to day. But they are as far removed from that as possible.
Yeah, well, we know that 1/3 of millennials still live with mom and dad. So here's the thing, it starts with mom and dad. The boomer generation, the Gen Xers, they also didn't do any sort of a service to their own children because they wanted to be friends with their children. They enabled their own kids to stay at home and to be not responsible whatsoever. They don't get out of the home, and they didn't learn anything in school. So that's where you have all these millennials sitting in their basements right now.
Right, and we've also reached the point, too, where actually expecting kids to work while they're in high school. It seems like a remarkable thing now, requiring your son or daughter to go work in high school. I did it. But to work through college, we had an article a couple weeks ago about how it's impossible now for kids to work when they're going to the universities. We don't, heaven forbid we get the kids off the university campuses for 12 to 15 hours a week to see how real life functions. Let's just keep them in the bubble, and that's it. We are raising children who are glorified bubble boys and girls, right? We are raising babies to live in a bubble, an educational bubble from 3 and 4 years old, from preschool all the way to college and beyond now, till they're 27, 28 now, to be nothing but bubble children. They don't know how to do anything. They lack the ability, they're completely self-sufficient, which is what we want. All the sociology we teach your kids in school now, your real property taxes are paying for it, right? All the sociology we're teaching your kids at the expense of real knowledge or self-sufficiency, that gets this. It breeds dependency. What does a big, burgeoning federal government with socialist tendencies, what does it want from your children? It doesn't want entrepreneurship, doesn't want creativity, it doesn't want self-sufficiency. These types of government want dependence. They need to be needed by you. They need you to be able to do nothing so they can take more of what you have to give back to you selectively what they think you ought to have. It's a recipe for socialism.
Okay, so if you had to attend this adulting day, what class would you need to take?
How not to want to slap people who are in their 20s who don't know how to balance a checkbook or count change. That would be my problem. How do you not slap them? Remember in the old 1950s and 60s movie, a good bracing slap across the face? Would kind of just wait, a glass of water tossed in your mug would kind of shake you out of your reverie and bring you back to at least acknowledging the realities of life? No, there's nothing you can do with these kids anymore. You are breeding a generation that is going to be children until the time they're put in the grave. These are going to be senior citizen babies in senior citizen nursing homes being tended to by God knows what the next generations are going to be, who are going to be infantile children themselves. Remember when Shakespeare said, the 7 stages of life, right? From As You Like It, that great speech. A man's life has 7 ages. Starts by being a baby, remember? Mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. And then the very last stage of life, the 7th, was when you were so old it was called second childhood. For Shakespeare's world, which was an adult world, you started off as a baby, and then in your extreme old age, in your dotage, you were back to being a baby, peeing your little diapers. Now, under progressive education, the entire 7 ages of man is 7 ages and stages of infancy. That's how juvenile our culture is. Baby from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. You never have a break from your infantile babyish.
Okay. Well, the University of Iowa is saying that their non-discrimination policy trumps the Constitution of the United States. A federal court is going to determine whether this is true or not, and it all started with a student group, the Business Leaders in Christ, which was banned by the university for refusing to allow a student living an openly homosexual lifestyle to be a Christian leader. The university claims that local and state non-discrimination laws trump the U.S. Constitution, giving it a right to ban these Christian groups from campus. So the university required that all Christian and other faith-based student organizations include in their bylaws or constitutions a statement affirming the homosexual agenda, allowing homosexuals to be leaders. The university eventually dismissed dozens of faith-based student groups. And so what's happening now is the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, through the lawyers with Beckett, they filed in federal court a motion for partial summary judgment asking to permanently require equal treatment for all organizations.
So, Katie, you're a millennial.
Yes, I am.
May I attempt to test you in my capacity as a university professor to see how teachable you are? This story that you just brought up, yes, it references a major shift in culture that I pointed out about 20 minutes ago. Can you name that shift?
Something with diversity, something with inclusion.
Bingo. That's a millennial that there's hope for. We may have to put her in her seatbelt because she can't buckle it herself, but that's a millennial that can be taught something. This is an exact example at the University of Iowa of what I'm talking about here. That Christian organizations on college campuses, there's very few of them, right? And I guarantee you there's only one Christian Businessmen's Association on the University of Iowa campus, which means they're interested in 2 things: Christianity and how it relates to their business degrees. Along comes the University of Iowa and says, unless you allow non-Christians and homosexuals to basically serve as leaders in your program, you are not, give it to me,
inclusive.
You are not being inclusive. Our insistence on inclusivity on your college campuses, which means that everybody, now here's an interesting thing. Would they require an African-American club to incorporate neo-Nazis? Would they require a gay club on college campus to be represented by homophobes? I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be. But the argument here is not being used to censor liberal groups. It's being used to drive out conservative ones. So a Christian business association on a university campus must either become open to homosexuality, which runs against its Christian mandate, or they have to be gotten rid of. In the name of inclusion, we can justify excluding everything that we progressives don't feel are inclusive enough. Notice, these are the same progressives who are building dorms for black students only, who are building dormitories and rec rooms for transgender students only. So on the one hand, the inclusive crowd is excluding cisgendered white males, white people in general, Christians in general. But they're doing it under the rubric of inclusion. This, my friends, is the fascist nature of all of this. This is what we have to watch out for. And notice what the University of Iowa is doing in court. They're arguing with a straight face that their right to exclude in the name of including trumps the American Constitution. It is bigger, literally, professionalized discrimination is more important to universities than the laws of the Constitution that grant that everybody is equal under the law. That's the argument they are making now.
They are. And Daniel Blomberg, he's a senior counsel at Beckett. He's representing InterVarsity. I like what he said. He said that in the name of non-discrimination, the University of Iowa discriminated against more than a dozen diverse religious groups, including Christians, Muslims, and Sikhs. That's Orwellian. Real diversity requires real differences. But as we've pointed out, diversity we don't care about.
Real diversity requires real difference. And I said just a moment ago, right, that the purpose of this inclusivity movement, transferring away from diversity and towards inclusion as our model, is the death of diversity, right? You can't have it. It shows you what I've tried to suggest to you for years. Diversity was never the end game. They never gave a rat's rip about real diversity, intellectual diversity. They don't want to hear arguments from real thinking kids that challenge their assumptions. This is the most rote, indoctrinaire sort of education you can give kids. And we're doing it in this country starting at the youngest ages.
And that's why you get our lovely college democratic socialists, who we already have heard over the past year about how they want free tuition, they want a federal jobs guarantee, they want a living wage, they want unicorns and ponies. And now they have a new right. They're demanding that they get 8 hours of sleep per night. At the Georgia Institute of Technology, students made their demands known in an emailed memo from the Young Democratic Socialists of America at Georgia Tech. In their little campaign, it says, "We're beginning our 8 hours campaign. If you're not getting enough sleep due to coursework overload or academic commitments, email us. We will advocate for you, confronting professors, challenging administration, and so forth to make a real commitment to the health of every student. Everyone deserves 8 hours of sleep." Now, mind you, they misspelled commitment twice in that little spiel.
It's because they were drowsy,
They
obviously.
were just too tired to really spell it correctly. So, let's talk about that.
This cracks me up. First of all, I got to ask the question. So this is the Democratic Socialist group on campus in Georgia. Are there any Republican capitalists on the board of the Democrat Socialist group? Because if there are not, absolutely Republican capitalists on the board of directors of the Democrat Socialist group on campus, it is not inclusive, and therefore we ought to shut it down. You and I know that's not going to happen. However, this begging for 8 hours of sleep kills me. As a university professor for 25 years, watching what your kids do, the fact that they're not getting 8 hours of sleep has nothing to do with their schoolwork. I guarantee you that my university kids are routinely blowing off their coursework to party, to drink, to play video games, right? To participate in stupid garbage like the Democratic Socialist groups on campus. These kids are sacrificing their education for their social lives. What you ought to do is require 8 hours of, if I would be happy of this, the implication seems to be that all we should ask of our kids on a college campus is 8 hours of schoolwork a day. That's 3 times as much coursework as my kids are doing, right? More than that, right? Right. If you could, I would be willing to pass a mandate that every kid is in his bed with bolted into his room under the covers. We could have monitors like we had in the 50s. Do bed checks. I would be willing to make sure that those kids were in bed at 9 o'clock every night so they could be up at 5 in the morning. We'll lock them in their rooms. We'll strap them to their beds. If you could guarantee me just 4 hours of serious engagement with their coursework a week, I would make that trade-off of. But of course, notice what these little idiot socialist progressives are doing. They're blaming schoolwork for why their kids can't have sleep. Right? They're blaming the university, its homework, its policies. How many stories have we seen over the last couple of months about this? What these kids on college campuses want is a college degree without having to do anything to earn one. We should get college degrees because we're special snowflakes. Does it really matter if we attend class? Does it really matter if we know how to read? Your schools have already decided no. We are graduating at every level, middle, high school, university level. We're graduating illiterates. Does it really matter? Just give them the degree.
You are one of those oppressive professors.
I sure am.
And as they said in their open letter to President George Peterson, stating their complaints about the mental health of the students, they said some professors still hold their students to unreasonable expectations. There are professors who announce to their students that losing sleep and pulling all-nighters to finish assignments is expected for them to excel in the course. This behavior is unacceptable. Classes should be graded based on students' learning course material as well as transparent criteria of course objectives instead of through opaque bell curves that pit students against each other.
Yeah, and here back to my previous point. Did you see how this group of young, uneducated college kids who call themselves democratic socialists, they've decided that it's a mental health issue. We just said in the previous segment, right? Who's deciding what mental health is on college campuses? Now we know it's sophomores in college with no training whatsoever. Those are the ones who are deciding what's good for mental health. And your universities are listening to them.
And their demands include hiring more counselors and psychiatrists.
There you go.
Making classes easier and less competitive.
There you go.
Reducing student coursework and eliminating all fees for psychiatry appointments.
We want more psychiatric help that you hire that we don't have to pay for, number one. Number two, we want courses to be easier and less competitive. And what that means is there should be no difference between people who get A's and people who get F. That's competitive. Those silly little overachievers, right? Asian and white kids probably. So actually, it's probably 6 Asian kids, right, with thick glasses getting all the A's. And that's just not fair because how do we compete with that? So let's decompetitize our kids' education, which is to mean not educate them at all. What they're basically saying to you is, give us a diploma. How far away are we from college kids demanding diplomas that they don't have to pay for, but that are given them for nothing that they're paid for receiving? The talk about paying college athletes, right? You bring these college athletes to these big campuses. You pay all their room and board. You feed them magisterially. You gave them absolute health care and medical care that the other kids don't get. And now we're being told you have to pay those kids because of all the money they're making for the university. How soon before the young Democrat socialists, this could be the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez movement, right? We start paying kids to go to college instead of charging them to go. Maybe we pay them. That's the next step, right? They want free tuition. Let's just skip that. Maybe we owe them, right? They're coming to our colleges after all. They're gracing our universities and colleges with their presence. Maybe we ought to pay them to come. We're not far away from that either.
No, we're a lot closer than you think.
It's where you have to go. Don't be one of those conservatives. Please do not be one of those conservatives or one of those just normal people who thinks that what the latest stupid thing the left wants is the last thing they're going to ask for, right? With the left, the progressive left, it is always a journey without a destination. It is never stopping at any point. So as absurd as this sounds, what we're saying, students demanding to be paid to attend colleges, as stupid as that sounds, would you have thought 10 years ago that you'd have transgender bathrooms? Would you have thought 10 years ago that you have middle school boys and girls showering together? Would you have thought that 10 years ago? Think about where you're going to be in the next 10 if we don't wake up, America.
That's depressing. We have more student craziness where students are opposing a new multicultural space because it's too welcoming. I'm going to repeat that. Students are opposing a new multicultural space because it's too welcoming. This is from the Eagle, the student newspaper at American University, where they reported that the Hub for Organizing Multiculturalism and Equity, home, in the Mary Graydon Center on campus falls short of what a space for students of color should be. They created this space at the Mary Graydon Center as a reaction to racist incidents. But as one student said, home doesn't provide people with a sense of security, with a sense of belonging when everyone of all types of affinity groups can be there too. That kid is too woke.
Listen to the language, right? The multicultural center you built for us that gravitates around non-white students is too welcoming of everybody to be actually, what's the word, Katie, millennial, testing. This proves what thesis? We're going to call it the Duke Pesta theory of...
inclusivity.
The Duke Pesta theory of inclusivity now, right? But again, do you see too how this radically demonstrates my premise? And it's happened kind of overnight without people knowing it. Diversity now is dropping away. The word is inclusivity. Wherever you see that word, your ears better perk up. This is the argument, right? If this university is committed to inclusivity, by definition, the students are saying it's too inclusive, right? We want inclusivity to mean only those people we want around us. Only those people who look like us, only those people who think the way we do. That's the definition of inclusivity. They're not hiding this. They use the word inclusivity and everybody kind of moans, like when they see puppy dogs. Aw, if you want inclusive, what's wrong with inclusivity? See how wonderful these people are. We're paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year teaching our kids to be inclusive. Now you know what inclusivity means. It means, by definition, it's opposite. This is, of course, Orwellian doublespeak, isn't it? You say black, but that really means white. You say true, it really means false. This is a complete scam. It is intellectually dishonest. It is illogical. It is unempirical. It is the exact opposite of what universities were framed to do, to posit reality to your children and to help them navigate a world of realities. This is fairy tale stuff. This is the bubble.
And because this space, the home, which has couches, chairs, bean bags, and a TV, it's the place where you can just come and be, as they say. It's not inclusive enough because everyone gets to use it. So now there are students who are still demanding a black house. One campus official said she's continuing to develop the idea of creating a living, learning community for black students, and that the next steps include surveying the interest for a space and comparing that with AU's inventory of housing.
Yeah, so you think about it. They spent all this money and resources on a multicultural center. Your kids' tuition paid for it. That's why your kids' tuition is so high. If your kids were just being taught how to read, to write, and to think, your tuition would be 1/20th of what it is. But all that money is going to build huge multicultural centers that are then too inclusive. So now you're going to have this big multicultural center in the center of campus that everyone can use, but nobody does. And then you'll have a black house. And then once you have a black house, you have to have a Hispanic house. And then once you have a Hispanic house, you have to have an Asian house. And then once you have that, you're going to have lesbian, queer, transgender houses. And this is what you do, right? In the name of inclusion, you start segregating. In the name of inclusion, you start creating separate but equal. You are now segregating in the name of defeating racial difference.
This is what happens when you give a mouse a cookie. That's basically what happens.
Go.
All right, well, we know how stressful the holidays can be, and I don't know how stressed you were this year for your finals week, but everyone is trying to relax, and we're all going to just turn to goat yoga to distress because it's all the rage. This fall, there were plenty of events that were held at campuses across the country. The University of Tennessee, Chattanooga had distress and engage in self-care with this yoga. Kansas State University had a noontime yoga to distress. So they're doing goat yoga. They're doing just regular yoga.
Explain what goat yoga is for those who
it's
don't keep up with the worldly stupidity. What is goat yoga?
Okay, so you're doing yoga and there are cute goats. The kids are jumping around, and apparently that's supposed to somehow
So doing
calm
yoga with goats around you is somehow calming.
It's yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
And where's PETA?
That's a very, because what if someone falls out of downward dog
why
and then
goats
into the goat?
And not other animals? That starts to me as very exclusive.
I feel like goats need their own representation.
And here's the other thing I would point out, because I know we got another story that's related to this one. If you're taking a sacred Indian art form, a spiritual exercise called yoga, and you are mingling it with dirty barnyard goats, isn't this going to offend somebody, Katie?
Fine. Back at American University, they are doing yoga, goats or not. It's cultural appropriation over there. The Bhakti Yoga group dissolved after student Maya Krishnan filed a complaint with the President's Council on Diversity and Inclusion, and of course she wrote an op-ed in the Eagle student newspaper. Krishnan says that she saw a non-Indian group performing the Indian epic, the Ramayana. Since the group was invited by the university's Bhakti Yoga Club, they are responsible for cultural appropriation. The group is called Viva Cultura. It's a multinational performing arts group. And Krishnan's complaint is that the reality of this is that white European dancers will never know my intersectional experience as a Hindu woman, being a brown-bodied person, and the other aspects of systematic racism that I, as well as other South Asian people, have experienced.
Right. So on the one hand, you've got American university students doing goat yoga to relax, right? Kind of hippie, kind of new age, kind of hipster, right?
The goat yoga expert, Melanie Heaston, says that it's super fun and loving and goofy.
Loving and goofy. And that's the one hand. On the other hand, you have market one Hindu student who now accuses an organization that teaches serious yoga on a college campus, sort of meditational yoga, physical and spiritual yoga, now has to disband, right? Because one Hindu student objects that white people are doing this. And by the way, this woman, Krishna was her name?
Krishnan.
Krishnan was her name. She is arguing her intersectional experiences mean that white people aren't allowed to do yoga. But isn't the definition of intersectional that you're part of a lot of things? So in other words, Krishnan, she may be a Hindu, she may have origins, her family may have come from East Asia, but however, she is an American with American citizenship, having been born in this country and educated in it, right? So isn't part of her intersectionality, isn't part of the sections of her being Europeanness, or excuse me, Americanness, I should say? And if that's the case, why couldn't that part of her, the part of her that grew up in this country and culture, why can't that fit with her Asian heritage? I'm not bothered by, as an Italian American, I'm not bothered by Japanese people owning pizza houses. It doesn't bother me because you know what? I am more than just an Italian. I have never lived in Italy, right? And so I can eat the pizza if it's good, even if a Japanese I could have my laundry done by non-Koreans, right? And not be offended by that. I mean, come on. Why does this intersectionality, it doesn't mean intersectionality. It means the only parts of me that matter are the parts that are radically different from whitey.
Your diversity.
And they get to shut everything down. Oh, more inclusion, eradicating diversity. I would think it would be an honor. Look, as a Christian, when non-Christian people come to this country and convert to Christianity, I see that as a damn good thing. Does that make me a bigot?
Yes.
When I see Korean Christians, I just love them. I want to give them a big hug. Welcome to Jesus, right? So when Europeans are doing yoga, your response to that is racist.
And everyone must resign. And the club must be disbanded, as it promptly was.
Something is spiritually wrong with these people. This is the time of, they've got garlic in their souls, right? They're like the Grinch. Maybe their underwear are 3 sizes too small. What's wrong with these people? That Miss Krishnan decides that rather than being amazed as an Asian American student, far, 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 thousands away from the land that her parents grew up in, to see her culture being given back to her in one instance by people who happen to be white, right? And that's enough to get her to say, stop it, you're not allowed to do that. I guarantee you, if I flew over to their culture and started going to school in Hindustan, I guarantee you, if they put on a Christmas pageant with all Indian faces, right, I would be all into that, man. I'd be totally into that. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you?
We don't have time. There's so much wrong with you.
It doesn't
so much.
It is so inhumane, these people are.
All right. Well, we hope that you're not a Grinch this holiday season. And if you want to give Dr. Duke and myself a very Merry Christmas early present, please head over to drdukeshow.com and subscribe to the podcast. While there, you can leave a nice, happy Christmas note to both of us and give us a 5-star review while you're there, too.
You're a mean one, Miss Krishnan. You've got turnips in your smile. You've got all the tender sweetness of a seasick crocodile, Miss Krishna. And that does it, thankfully, for this week, for this year, for this Christmas season on The Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you heard, and I'm not sure you did, please share the podcast with your friends. The Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Millennial Katie. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time.